Try to map an infinite landscape using a single flickering lamp. The mathematics of the attempt eventually fail. Human philosophy fractures when it tries to process the infinite variables of existence using a finite toolset. This forces an audit of our primary instrument, human logic. We must determine if our reasoning is an objective window into the universe or a system strictly capped by biological and sensory limits. Most secular moral frameworks rely on a brain that cannot even map its own neural architecture to define universal truth. This creates the finite mind trap, where a limited processor attempts to author its own absolute rules. The opening pages of Surah Al-Baqarah address this structural weakness. They present a logic system built on empirical evidence rather than the subjective weight of human opinion. Attempting to decode an infinite universe with a finite mind guarantees systemic error. Success requires a data source that exists outside the limits of the observer. When we pick up a text, we usually assume the role of the critic. We stand outside the book, judging its validity against our personal metrics of truth and logic. Surah Al-Baqarah immediately reverses this hierarchy. Within the first few verses, the text begins to categorize the reader, mapping human behavior into 3 distinct psychological profiles: the sincere, the refuser, and the double-minded. It identifies itself as Huda lil Muttaqin. This defines the text as a practical, evidence-based guidance system. It is a tool designed to produce specific results for those who actively implement its moral and physical parameters. The relationship between the reader and the book shifts. While you seek to analyze the words, the verses begin to map your internal biases and expose the hidden logic behind your decisions. This psychological audit begins in 2nd century Arabia, a society that considered complex linguistic mastery the absolute peak of human intellectual achievement. This manuscript captures the first challenge presented to these linguistic masters: 3 isolated letters, Alif-Lam-Meem. These are the exact elemental building blocks of the Arabic language, used daily for trade and poetry. Yet, in this specific sequence, they refuse to yield a human-defined meaning. This functions as a mechanical check on intellectual pride. It places the most sophisticated scholars in front of a data point their brains are structurally unable to parse. For 14 centuries, the most advanced thinkers have arrived at this same boundary. Their processing capacity hits a hard limit, proving that some layers of reality remain inaccessible to the independent human mind. Higher learning can only begin once the intellect acknowledges its own fixed perimeter. Accepting these limits is the first step towards receiving data from a source that transcends them. The text presents a case study in failed logic, Al-Mathal al-Nari, the parable of the fire. The parable describes a man in absolute darkness, who ignites a small, flickering spark. The fire provides a moment of false security before the environment snuffs out the light, leaving him in a deeper gloom than before. Stoking this fire represents the human attempt to manufacture a personalized moral code. It is an effort to navigate the vast unknowns of existence using only self-authored logic. This reliance on artificial light leads to cognitive dissonance. The mind struggles to reconcile its manufactured truth with the harsh reality of the surrounding darkness. The text notes that God removes their nur, their internal capacity for insight. Without this inward clarity, the external fire is useless. This state becomes terminal. The individual loses the ability to process truth, becoming existentially deaf, dumb, and blind, trapped in a logic loop with no exit. Creating an ethics of convenience offers a brief worldly utility, but it guarantees an eventual and permanent loss of existential vision. This internal dissonance eventually manifests as systemic social decay. The text provides a profile of the double-minded. They are dual-state operators who maneuver between conflicting groups, using sophisticated wordplay to extract benefits from both sides. When confronted, they employ a linguistic defense, Innama nahnu muslihun, claiming they are only reformers. Innama is restrictive, suggesting zero corruption, revealing total self-deception. The Quran identifies them as actual agents of decay, though their internal metrics fail to register the destruction. This is a disease of the heart. It warps the mind's ability to measure impact, leading individuals to believe that systemic destruction is actually social progress. Human logic, when disconnected from divine parameters, eventually gains the capacity to rationalize its own most devastating failures as successes. In many modern circles, religious submission is viewed as an abandonment of intellectual rigor. The Quranic narrative suggests the opposite is true. To demonstrate this, the text compares the reasoning of Iblis, Satan, against the reasoning of the angels. Iblis uses a narrow, comparative logic. He claims superiority because he is made of fire, while man is made of clay. This logic ignores the fact that both elements are governed by the same creator. The angels employ a higher-level calculation. They recognize their own finite processing power and refuse to draw conclusions that exceed the data provided by the infinite source. Prostration, or Sajdah, functions as a high-level rational acknowledgement. It is a finite node recognizing its inherent limits when interfacing with an omniscient dataset. For a finite consciousness, unconditional obedience to a flawless divine law is the only mathematically sound action. The text contrasts the fragile, human-made fire with a far more powerful reality, Al-Mathal Al-Mai, the parable of the storm. The storm is complex, containing heavy, life-giving rain alongside thick darkness, crashing thunder, and sudden flashes of lightning. This storm represents the reality of Islam. The rain is the guidance that revives a society. The thunder represents moral consequences, and the lightning provides the undeniable proofs of truth. The double-minded respond by plugging their ears. They seek to block out the thunderous warnings while desperately trying to preserve their comfortable, self-made illusions. Their movement is purely opportunistic. They walk only when the lightning flashes and faith aligns with profit. When the darkness of sacrifice or hardship returns, they stop. Divine guidance is overwhelming and demands high endurance. Yet it is the only mechanism capable of bringing life back to a dead system. Al-Baqarah eventually moves from parables to concrete physical laws. The text demands empirical observation of the physical world, the sky, the rain, and the earth. It uses these constants to prove its core axioms, moving beyond abstract debate. These represent divine boundaries. When human logic is aligned with them, fragmented and chaotic variables lock into a stable, unbreakable architecture. Navigating reality with a self-authored moral code will always result in cognitive dissonance and systemic failure. The choice is a matter of alignment. You can continue with the unstable algorithm of finite reasoning, or you can synchronize your intellect with the infinite blueprint of the Creator.